My name is Nova Blake, and I was born for minutes before my twin brother Leo. 4 minutes. I've spent the better part of 23 years wondering if those 4 minutes were the universe's way of apologizing in advance for everything that was about to happen to me. We were identical in face and entirely opposite in fortune. People who met us together would squint back and forth between us, the kind of expression usually reserved for those spot-the-difference puzzles. Except the difference was always obvious once you looked closely. Leo had a smile that could charm the scales off a fish. Mine apparently could not. Where he walked into a room and lit it up, I walked into a room, and someone would invariably spill their drink. We were both Omegas. It's a designation that in our family carried a great deal of pomp and ceremony, but the similarities ended there. Leo was a standard Omega, gentle, magnetic, adored. I was a S-class Omega, which is the biological equivalent of being handed a sports car and told the roads are closed forever. It meant I was physically stronger than most alphas, my senses sharper, my instincts keener, my constitution built for endurance rather than elegance. It also meant absolutely nothing in our household, because our parents had decided quite early on that Leo was the one worth investing in, and I was simply the extra one my mom popped out. Leo will carry on the family name, Father used to announce at dinner with the proud, full-chested air of a man revealing a very clever plan. And Nova will find something to do, Mother would add brightly, as though finding something to do were a perfectly reasonable life trajectory for their firstborn child. I had learned not to take it personally. Or rather, I had learned to take it very personally, but to do so quietly in my room, while aggressively rereading whatever book I happened to be holding at the time. Now, you might think that being the overlooked twin would have made me bitter, resentful, and prone to dramatic monologues. You would be exactly right. But I was also, I'd like to think, reasonably self-aware about it. I knew my parents weren't evil. They were simply, comprehensively, breathtakingly foolish. To their credit, and I extend this credit reluctantly, they had never actually discriminated in the practical sense. Leo and I had attended the same schools, taken the same classes, received the same allowance delivered in identical envelopes on the first of every month. Every tutor, every lesson, every opportunity had been split with scrupulous fairness. My mother had even kept a notebook, apparently, to ensure nothing was unequal. The problem was never the notebook. The problem was everything that lived outside it, the warmth in my father's voice when he spoke Leo's name, the way a room rearranged itself around my brother's moods, the thousand small invisible ways a family can make one child feel like the main event, and another like the support act without ever meaning to, without ever quite noticing they were doing it at all. Which brings me to the morning when everything collapsed. It was the day of Leo's wedding. He was set to marry Atlas Monroe, the most feared and respected businessman in the city, though businessman is perhaps a polite word for someone whose actual business involved a great deal of backroom dealing, loyalty oaths, and the occasional strongly worded conversation delivered at 3 in the morning. Atlas Monroe was an S-class alpha of considerable standing, a man so controlled and composed that rumor had it that he got his socks ironed. He had been betrothed to Leo for 2 years, had apparently been entirely in love with what he had heard about him, and was expecting a wedding today. Leo, however, suddenly had other plans. I was in the kitchen eating toast when my brother sauntered in, still in his dressing gown, looking as though he'd already decided that this was going to be a delightful day for everyone. "Morning," he said, stealing half my toast without asking. "The ceremony is in 6 hours," I reminded him. "About that." He sat down, picked up my tea, took a long sip, put it back, and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone about to announce that they'd accidentally let the dog out. "I've decided not to marry Atlas." Kitchen went very quiet. Father looked up from his newspaper. Mother looked up from her crossword. I looked up from what remained of my breakfast. "Sorry," I said. "Could you repeat that?" "I'm not marrying Atlas. It's been wonderful, obviously, but I don't really know him. Plus, I've met someone new. His name is Jason. He writes poetry, and he thinks I'm extraordinary." Leo smiled the smile of someone who had very much not thought this through. "We met at a gallery opening 3 weeks ago." He says my laugh sounds like wind chimes. "Wind chimes," Father repeated. in a voice that suggested he was measuring the structural integrity of the table and wondering if he could put his head through it. "Wind chimes," Leo confirmed, delighted. What followed was approximately 12 minutes of chaos. Father turned colors I had not previously known the human face could achieve. Mother knocked over her entire cup of tea and didn't notice. Leo described Jason in increasingly florid terms, while everyone else deteriorated around him. And then, in the middle of it all, our mother turned to me. Her eyes had that particular sharpness they got when she was about to say something that would rearrange my entire life without my consent. "Nova," she said. "No," I said immediately, because I could already see where this was going. "You'll go in his place?" "Absolutely not. You look identical." "We do not look identical. I am 4 minutes older, and I am a completely different class. Atlas has never really met either of you in person. The engagement was conducted through intermediaries." This was tragically true. Atlas moved in circles so rarefied that the betrothal had been arranged through a series of formal letters, photographs carefully selected by our mother, correspondences carefully written using AI, and one dinner attended only by our parents. It was very old-fashioned. It was also very inconvenient for me personally right now. You can't be serious. You want me to impersonate my brother at his wedding to a man who, if the rumors are accurate, has once made a rival cry simply by looking at him for too long? "You'll be fine," Mother said. "The last time you said that, I fell off a horse. That was different." "Mother, he is an alpha with an empire, a reputation, and apparently very strong opinions. If he finds out I'm done—" "He won't find out," Father said firmly. In the voice he used when he had decided something was true and was daring reality to contradict him, Leo had the decency to look slightly sheepish. "Only slightly. You always said you were the capable one," he offered. I was being sarcastic. "It'll be an adventure. It will be a catastrophe." It was both. They put me in the ceremonial outfit that had been tailored for Leo. It fit perfectly. That was the first bad sign. We were the same height, same build, same general shape. But the fact that the beautifully embroidered suit hung on my shoulders, as though it had been made for me, specifically made me feel, irrationally, that the universe was complicit in this disaster. I stood in front of the mirror and thought about escaping. The window was 2 stories up. The car was waiting at the front. My passport was in my room. Theoretically, I could simply walk out, get on a train to somewhere with a different coastline, and become a different person entirely. I could go somewhere no one had heard of Atlas, or his legendary composure, or his reportedly very firm handshake. Then I thought, with a clarity that surprised me, if I run, Atlas will come looking for an explanation, and when he finds one, it will not go well for any of us. I thought no one could corner Leo, argue him down, or appeal to his sense of responsibility, largely because his sense of responsibility was decorative rather than functional. Case in point, I'd just spent 4 hours doing exactly that, with 0 results, and my foolish parents simply let him step into his brand new Merc, a wedding gift for the wedding that was supposed to happen, and simply ride away to meet that wind chime guy. I couldn't not do anything, not this time. So I walked down the aisle of a wedding hall, decorated in a way that strongly suggested someone had been given an unlimited budget and told to make it elegant, which they had interpreted as put expensive things everywhere. There were flowers I had never seen before. There were guests and outfits that cost more than my annual allowance. There was a string quartet playing something that sounded very serious, which seemed appropriate given the seriousness of the crime I was about to commit. And at the end of the aisle, there was Atlas. He was tall. Very tall. I had not been prepared for quite how tall. He had the kind of still, composed posture you saw in statues of historical figures, who had done something significant, though in his case, the significant thing was apparently frightening the entire business underworld into cooperation. He wore a dark suit with the sort of precision that made you wonder if it was made for him that morning. His expression, as I walked towards him, was, oh no, it was warm. His face, for all its controlled severity, had broken into something that was not quite a smile, but was unmistakably soft around the edges. His eyes, dark, steady, searching, found mine and stayed there. And in them I saw something that hit me directly in the sternum. Adoration. Love, maybe? He was looking at what he thought was the person he loved. The expression on his face was so unguarded and genuine that I nearly stopped walking entirely. Behind me, I heard my mother make a very quiet but pointed noise that translated to keep going. And I kept going. The ceremony was in the way of all ceremonies. Simultaneously extremely long and disturbingly brief. I said the words that were in the booklet. I exchanged the rings. His hands were warm, which I noted with profound irrelevance. I smiled at the right moments. I nodded at the right moments, and I silently composed an extremely detailed complaint letter to the universe in my head. For the entirety of it, when he kissed me at the end of the ceremony, it was brief and ceremonial, and I had been fully prepared for it to feel like nothing, because I was in the middle of committing identity fraud. In front of 500 people, it did not feel like nothing. It felt like something I didn't have words for yet. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself it was the alpha pheromones. I told myself many useful lies, and then we turned to face the applause. And his hand found the small of my back, and I thought with absolute despair, I am in so much trouble. The wedding chamber was a room in the east wing of the estate, Atlas's estate, which I was now apparently living in, a fact I had not yet fully processed. Someone had clearly prepared it, with great romantic intention, candles everywhere. Silk sheets turned down at precise angles, flowers arranged in vases. It was, in short, a room that had been set up to mark the beginning of a life together. And I was standing in the middle of it. It's like a very overdressed person who had wandered into the wrong story. I had spent the walk from the ceremony to this room thinking of various strategies for the evening, all of which involved me saying very little, Atlas saying very little, and both of us maintaining a respectful distance. While I figured out a plan for the morning, these strategies had one fatal flaw. I had not accounted for him being drunk. Not unpleasantly drunk, not aggressively drunk, just warmly, softly, completely lost all his careful composure drunk. The way someone gets when they've spent several hours toasting and being toasted at their own wedding, and have forgotten to eat. He came in, jacket over one arm, tie loosened, looking approximately 40% less terrifying than he normally did, and he said, with great sincerity, "You're very beautiful." "Thank you." I stepped sideways toward the window. "I'm very glad we're married." "Yes." Funny how that worked out. He crossed the room, and I sidestepped again. And for a brief moment, we were doing something that resembled a very polite waltz, which would have been charming under literally any other circumstances. Then he reached out to take my hand, and his fingers grazed my wrist, and he paused. Alphas have very good instincts, especially S-class alphas. I have heard this many times and have always found it somewhat alarming in an abstract way. I found it extremely alarming now in a very concrete way. As I watched Atlas's slightly glassy eyes slowly sharpen, he sniffed. He pulled back. He sniffed again, with the expression of someone doing a very careful quality check on something that was not adding up. "This," he said slowly, "is not right." "I don't know what you mean," I said, which was such a spectacular lie that I genuinely impressed myself with the audacity of it. He took a step back, his eyes traveling over me with a sudden attention that was not drunk at all. His gaze landed on my left arm, where a small scar ran along the inside of my wrist, the result of an unfortunate incident with a garden wall when I was 12, and had very poor judgment about which sides of things were climbable. "Leo doesn't have a scar there." Silence. I might have acquired it. He stared at me. "That's not how scars work." "I am aware." And something in me gave up the ghost, because his eyes had cleared entirely now. And there was nothing drunk or soft in them anymore, just a cool, careful intelligence that was, I thought, probably going to result in a very bad night for me. "I'm not Leo." The silence that followed was the loudest I had ever sat in. Stood in, something in. He sat down on the edge of the sofa with the slow, controlled movement of someone who had decided that the only option was to be extremely deliberate about every action. because otherwise something was going to get broken. He looked at me for a long time. "Who are you?" And his voice was quiet and very, very still. "My name is Nova. I'm his twin. Elder by 4 minutes. Not that anyone in my family cares about that." I took a deep breath. "He decided this morning that he didn't want to marry you. He's met someone who says his laugh sounds like wind chimes. My parents decided that rather than inform you of this, they would send me instead, on the basis that we look similar enough that you wouldn't notice." I paused. I was against it, for what it's worth. I was very against it. Atlas had gone very still. I thought, with a distant, somewhat detached kind of dread, that this might be what people meant when they said someone was dangerously calm. "I should tell you," I continued, because I couldn't stop talking, which was a problem I developed under stress, "that I am genuinely sorry. You don't deserve this. Whatever you've done to people's rivals in back rooms at 3 in the morning, you don't deserve to be lied to on your wedding day. It's cruel and it's wrong, and my brother is a deeply irresponsible person." And I told them all it was a catastrophic idea. He ran a hand over his face. "Stop talking. I know I'm also responsible. I know I could have refused. I could have walked out there and told you the truth before the ceremony and let the whole thing collapse in front of everyone. But I was scared. I had heard enough about what you do to people who cross you, to know that announcing that your groom had run off with a poet was not something I was going to survive, with all my limbs in their current arrangement. So I made a choice, and it was a coward's choice, and I am sorry for that too." A silence. "Are you finished?" "Possibly. I can't always tell. Just stop talking for a moment." I stopped talking. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, to my tremendous bewilderment, he sighed, leaned back, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Right," he said. "Right." I repeated, "I'm not going to hurt you." He said it in the tone of a man who was working very hard to keep all his feelings arranged into a neat, manageable stack. "You're clearly not the one who decided any of this. And I am not the kind of person who punishes people for things they didn't choose." He looked at me directly. "But I need you to tell me everything. All of it. No editing, no softening." "What happened? Start to finish?" I told him. He did not interrupt once. He sat with the stillness of someone who had spent a great deal of time learning to receive bad news without visibly crumbling. And I told him the whole wretched story, Leo and the poetry-writing man, my parents' panicked decision, the 4 hours of arguing, the 2 hours of preparation, all of it. When I finished, the candles had burned noticeably lower, and my hands were clasped in my lap so tightly that my knuckles had gone pale. He was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "My pride," he said eventually, "would very much like to throw both of you and possibly your entire family out of a window. I understand. However," he looked at me, "you're not the only one responsible for your brother's choices or your parents' cowardice." Pause. "And you clearly weren't willing." I told them it was catastrophic. I said again, feeling that this point bore repeating, "You mentioned that several times. Ghost of something, not quite a smile." But its distant cousin crossed his face before retreating. He stood up, and his full height was, frankly, a lot of it. "Here is what will happen. You'll stay. Not because I want an omega I never asked for, but because I can't be the talk of the town. And announcing that I was deceived at my own wedding is not something I intend to do. My reputation and my pride have already had a difficult evening." He paused. "We will figure the rest out in the morning. You'll sleep there." He gestured to the bed with the air of a man allocating territory. "I'll sleep here." His hands moved towards the sofa. "You don't have to. I'm not arguing about furniture at midnight after the day I've had. The suite has an adjoining sitting room. Starting tomorrow, I'll sleep there." He looked at the sofa again. "Tonight I will manage." "That's very small," I observed. "Good night, Nova." I took the bed. He took the sofa. And for a long time in the dark, I lay awake thinking that this was the strangest and worst day of my life. And also thinking about the way his face had looked when he saw me walking down the aisle before he knew. Before the lie arrived. Just the warmth of it. I told myself to stop thinking about that. I was not entirely successful. I woke up the next morning expecting disaster. Instead, there was porridge. Not just porridge, there was an entire breakfast laid out by efficient and silent staff. With the kind of thoroughness that suggested Atlas ran his household the same way he presumably ran everything else. With meticulous attention to detail and absolutely no room for error. There were soft-boiled eggs. There were little side dishes. There was, most alarmingly, a small vase of breathtakingly beautiful flowers. In the center of the table, he was already seated, in a different suit, looking fully composed and well-rested, which I found very annoying because I had not slept remotely well and felt that the least he could do was also be slightly haggard. "Sit." He poured water into a glass and slid it toward me. "Thank you." I sat and looked at the plate in front of me. "Eat something." "Not sure I can. My stomach has been doing something very unpleasant since yesterday morning." "Understandable," he said, without looking up from his own food. "Eat anyway." The porridge was excellent, which seemed like an unnecessary additional piece of information for the universe to be throwing at me right now. That the man whose wedding I had accidentally attended as the groom was also, apparently, running a household with outstanding catering. "You're not going to tell anyone?" I said. "It wasn't quite a question. I told you last night I wasn't." "I know." I wanted to hear it again in the daylight when neither of us was. I gestured vaguely. "Having a crisis." I was going to say when the candles were out, but yes. He set down his cutlery with a precision that suggested each movement was considered. He looked at me, really looked, in that careful measuring way he had, like he was reading something. "Here is the situation as I see it. We are married. We are mates now, legally, formally, in front of 500 witnesses. This cannot be easily undone without an amount of paperwork, public attention, and general inconvenience that I am not willing to subject myself to right now. Given that I have 3 ongoing negotiations, a board meeting on Thursday, and apparently a personal life that is 10,000 kilometers from what I was expecting. You will stay. We will maintain appearances." Beyond that, something flickered across his face, less controlled. "We will figure it out." "That's very flexible of you," I said, slightly startled. "I thought in this situation you would have led with, 'I'm going to ruin your family.'" "I considered it," he said, entirely without inflection. "I decided it was disproportionate." "Very big of you." There was that slight lift at the corner of his lips again. "I thought so." And that was that. The estate was enormous. I will state this for the record. It was enormous. I had grown up in a house that was considered large by normal standards, but this was an estate in the way that geological formations are mountains, a fundamentally different category of thing. There were wings. There was a library with a rolling ladder. There was, astonishingly, a greenhouse. The master suite was designed with exactly our kind of standoff in mind, or at least, it might as well have been. The main bedroom connected through a heavy oak door to a sitting room furnished with a proper daybed, bookshelves, and its own window, overlooking the garden. Atlas took the sitting room without discussion, leaving me the bedroom, and the arrangement settled into place with the quiet efficiency of 2 people who had agreed. Without saying so aloud, that dignity required a door between them. The staff said nothing. If they found it unusual, they were far too professional to show it. Atlas was busy mostly. I understood that his business, the legitimate layers of it, at least involved an enormous number of meetings, phone calls, and the kind of focused intensity that filled rooms even when he was just walking through them on the way somewhere else. I saw him at breakfast, occasionally at dinner, and sometimes in passing, in the corridors, where we would exchange brief nods, like 2 diplomats maintaining cordial relations between countries that had recently had an incident. It was strange, intense, and oddly peaceful in its way. I actually discovered the greenhouse on my 4th day. It was tucked into the corner of the estate's formal garden, glass-paned and warm even in autumn, full of plants that someone had clearly arranged with great care. There were orchids, extraordinary ones, in whites and deep purples, and climbing plants I didn't have names for, and a row of herbs along the south wall that smelled of summer. I started going there every morning. It was quiet and the light was good. and the plants didn't look at me with carefully neutral expressions while trying to determine what to do about me. I was there on the 6th morning visit when he appeared in the doorway. I will say, in my own defense, that I did not embarrass myself too much. I startled. Yes, the watering can went sideways in my grip, and I had to grab the shelf to keep it from going over, but I recovered reasonably well. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, surveying the greenhouse with an expression I couldn't read. I didn't know anyone came in here. "Is it a problem?" I asked. "No." He stepped inside, which surprised me, because he moved through the estate with such purposeful efficiency that I had not imagined him lingering in a greenhouse. He stood among the orchids and looked at them with what seemed like genuine attention. "These were here when I bought the estate. I kept them. They're extraordinary. This one," I pointed to a deep violet bloom in the far corner, "is a genus I've only read about. I didn't know they could grow at this latitude." He looked at me with a small shift in his expression. "You know about orchids? I know about plants generally. I used to have a garden at our house, but it was mostly given over to what my mother called practical planting, which meant vegetables for the table and nothing interesting." I looked at the violet orchid. I always wanted to grow something beautiful. There was a pause. He crouched down beside one of the lower planters, this enormous, impeccably dressed man, crouching in a greenhouse, and examined the root structure with what seemed like genuine consideration. "They're harder than they look," he said. "Most people assume they're fragile. They're not. They grow in conditions that would kill most other things." He said it simply, factually, like a piece of information he was sharing. He was not looking at me when he said it, but I found myself looking at him and thinking, "Oh, yes, they do," finally said. We stayed in the greenhouse for a while longer, not talking very much, but not in an uncomfortable way. When he left, I stood among the orchids for a long time, holding the watering can, thinking thoughts I was not ready to look at directly yet. 9 weeks in, someone tried to shoot us. I wish I could say this was more surprising than it was, given what I now knew about Atlas's line of work, but I'd been living in a kind of optimistic bubble in which the more dramatic aspects of his life remained at a comfortable remove. And then we were in the car coming back from a dinner with several people whose names I was not told, and there was a very loud noise, and the car swerved violently. And in the very short gap between sound and understanding, Atlas said down, in a voice that was not loud but brooked absolutely no argument, and I went down. He covered me with his body. This is what I remember: the solidity of him, the steadiness of his heart beat against my ear, the complete and absolute certainty in his presence, as though the possibility of harm reaching me through him was something he had simply decided was not going to occur. It was over quickly. His security personnel, who I had thought of vaguely as several quiet men who were always around, turned out to be extraordinarily efficient, and within minutes the car was moving again and the situation was resolved. I did not ask what resolve meant specifically. I was shaking. I didn't realize until we were inside the estate and someone handed me tea, and I noticed my hands were not quite cooperating. Atlas was across the room, speaking quietly into a phone, his back to me. He had taken off his jacket. There was a small tear in the back of his shirt. He hadn't mentioned it. He finished the call, turned around and looked at me with that careful, measuring attention. "You're still shaking," he said. "I'm aware." I paused. "Then thank you. It's over, I know." I looked down at the tea. "It doesn't make the shaking stop immediately." He crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from me, close enough that I could see the fatigue in his face, the tightness around his eyes that he never let become anything more obvious. "Are you hurt?" "No." I looked at the tear in his shirt. "You have, it's nothing. Let me see." He looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to being told what to do, and was deciding how he felt about it. Then unexpectedly, he turned in his chair and let me look. A graze. Just a graze along the shoulder. He'd been right that it was nothing serious, but it was there. Proof of something that had happened very close to me without me knowing. And my throat went tight in a way I found inconvenient. "You should have that seen too." "It's fine. It could become infected. I'll have it looked at later. My staff who I can do it. I'm here. And something in my voice stopped him. He turned to look at me, and I held his gaze. And after a moment, he nodded. I found the first aid kit. I cleaned the grays. I did not make a production of it. I was very businesslike and efficient about the whole thing, and he sat still and let me. And when it was done, he said very quietly, "Thank you." "You covered me," I said. "In the car? You didn't have to. Of course I did." "I'm not the person you wanted to marry." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had that careful steadiness again, but there was something underneath it that wasn't steady at all. "No, but you are my husband. That means something to me." I looked at him. He was looking at the middle distance, which was, I had come to understand, what he did when he was saying something that cost him something. "I know you didn't choose this, and neither did I." He looked at me and seemed to make a decision. "I don't regret it. The marriage. Not anymore." The silence after that was different from the other silences. It settled between us like a quiet confession, gentle, aching, and full of things we were still too afraid to say out loud. That night I left the oak door between our rooms open. I didn't decide to, exactly. I simply didn't close it, which is a distinction that felt important to me and would probably have sounded absurd to anyone else. He didn't comment on it. When I woke briefly at some point in the small hours, I could see the faint outline of him in the doorway, having migrated, apparently without fanfare, to the far side of the bed. Fully dressed, on top of the covers, asleep. I decided not to address it in the morning, and neither did he. And after that, the oak door stayed open, and he slept in our bed. The library became ours, in the way that spaces become yours when you spend enough time in them together. We did not plan it this way. It simply happened over several evenings. I would be reading by the fire, and he would appear, and eventually he would take the seat beside mine, and we would read in companionable silence that grew less pointed and more comfortable with every passing week. He had unexpected taste in books, I had assumed based on available evidence. That Atlas read business strategy and perhaps the occasional historical biography. He did read those things, but he also read novels, which I had discovered on that first accidental evening in the study, and he read poetry, which I discovered when a slim volume fell out from between two larger books while I was reorganizing a shelf and turned out to be heavily annotated in his precise handwriting. He read, it turned out, everything voraciously, carefully. With the same thorough attention he applied to contracts and negotiations. One evening, 6 weeks later, I was reading a novel about a man who falls in love under inadvisable circumstances. I chose it somewhat intentionally, because I am not, in the end, immune to irony. And he came in and took his usual seat, and for a while we read in easy silence, with the fire doing its best work. Then he said, "What are you reading?" I told him. "Any good?" he asked, which was not the question I'd expected. I'd expected him to move on, but he was looking at me with genuine curiosity. "It's about a man who falls in love with someone very inconveniently," I said. "Under circumstances he didn't choose. He spends a great deal of the book arguing with himself about whether it's real." "Is it?" "The love. Yes, it's real. But it takes him a while to believe it." Atlas was quiet. He looked at his own book without reading it. "Then, do you regret it?" "This marriage." I had been waiting for this question. I had prepared an answer, carefully neutral, appropriately measured, maintaining the dignified distance that I had decided was the wise approach. Instead, I said, "No." He looked up. "I know I should," I said, and once I'd started, the words came out in the way they did sometimes, too honest, too fast. I was somewhat forced into it. I'd told myself I would be miserable, that I would endure it, that I would hold any resentment like a shield. I stopped, and then you were kind to me. In the greenhouse, and in the car, and in 100 small ways that you probably didn't even notice, and I looked at the fire. "No, I don't regret it." The silence was enormous. He set his book down. He was looking at me with an expression I had never quite seen on his face before, something unguarded, almost uncertain, which on a man of his usual composed certainty was startling as anything. He shifted in his seat toward me, and I turned toward him without deciding to. And for a moment, we were just looking at each other, very close, neither of us moving. Then he reached out and took my hand gently, as though it were something he'd been wanting to do for a while and had been waiting for the right moment. Nova, my name in his voice, undid me entirely. I need to tell you something. All right, I murmured, which was not adequate, but was the best I could manage. I was very angry, he said slowly, about being deceived. He paused, as though he were choosing each word with care. I was grieving in a way, for what I thought I'd had with Leo, for the future I'd planned. His hand was warm around mine, but that grief was for an idea, for a relationship I now understand was built on a version of him that was mostly my own projection. He looked at me steadily, and what I found in the weeks since is he stopped. Is what? I prompted. Is that I have very much liked getting to know you, he said, with the careful deliberateness of a man confessing something that cost him considerably, and that I think about you more than I had intended to, and that the marriage I have, which I did not ask for, has become— He stopped again, and this time I decided not to wait. I leaned across and kissed him. It was brief and impulsive, and the moment it happened, I pulled back, alarmed at myself. But before I could properly formulate a mortified apology, he made a small sound that could be described as relieved, and kissed me back. His hand came up to cup the side of my face with a gentleness that was, frankly, slightly at odds with his general reputation, and the kiss was warm and unhurried, and tasted of the tea we'd both been drinking, and I thought, with the small, coherent part of my brain that was still functioning, thank goodness. When we pulled apart, we were both somewhat disheveled, and he looked almost bashful, which was an expression I had not previously believed Atlas's face was capable of. It made me want to giggle. I was in the middle of a sentence, he said. I know. You were being very thorough about it. I got impatient. He looked at me for a moment. Then he smiled. Actually smiled. A full, genuine smile, which transformed his face entirely, and which I decided immediately was something I wanted to see as often as possible. I was going to say that the marriage I have has become the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. Oh, I said. Well, that's yes. Same. A slight smile still lingered on his face. Very eloquent? I'm working on it. He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh properly. Not the controlled, measured expression of amusement he deployed in company, but an actual, unguarded laugh, and it was wonderful. And I thought, so unfair of him to produce that laugh while I was already in a very compromised emotional state. I did the only thing I could. I moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him, and looked at him, and apparently that was enough. He kissed me again. Not the gentle, warm kiss from before. This was different. Deep, hungry, and desperate, filled with every careful week of silence and distance, and almost every moment we had both been holding ourselves back from, my hands fisted in his shirt without my permission. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing unsteadily. His forehead dropped to rest against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. Nova, his voice was raw, stripped of its usual composure entirely. If you keep looking at me like that, I won't be able to stop. My lips were still trembling. Then don't stop. Something shifted in his eyes, the last of the careful, controlled distance dissolving into something unguarded and certain and entirely his. He looked at me for a long moment, as though making sure, as though giving me every opportunity to change my mind. He kissed me again, softer this time, slower, his arms coming around me fully. And then without warning, he lifted me, simply gathered me up as though I weighed nothing at all. I made a sound of surprise against his shoulder that made him exhale a quiet, warm laugh into my hair. You could have warned me, he would have argued. He carried me out of the library. He laid me down on the bed with a care that undid me completely, his movements unhurried, deliberate, reverent, as though I were something extraordinarily precious that he could not quite believe was his. His forehead came to rest against mine, his breath unsteady for the first time since I had known him. Tell me to stop, he whispered, and I will. I reached up and wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him down toward me. Don't stop, and there were no more words after that. Only the quiet of the room and the dying fire casting him in gold. Soft touches that left me undone, deep sighs that pulled him closer to my heart. I woke up the next morning in a daze. All the new information took several seconds to process. I stared at the ceiling. The ceiling was familiar. I was in the bedroom. The light was early and pale gold, and the room was very quiet. And I was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the blankets. I turned my head. Atlas was already awake, sitting up reading, looking for all the world like a man who woke at a sensible hour and was entirely unbothered by recent events. His hair was slightly less perfect than usual. I found this extremely relevant. "Good morning," he said. Closing his book, "Good morning," I replied. A pause. I continued carefully. Absolutely no complaints. The corner of his mouth curved. "I'm glad to hear it. I simply want that on record." Duly noted. He put the book away and laid down, smiling softly, and I thought I could get used to this. I was, in fact, already used to this, which was a problem I had apparently decided to stop fighting somewhere on the 4th week of living here. Then he fully turned onto his side to face me, and the expression on his face made me go very still. He looked undone in a quiet way, not distressed, just open, in the manner of someone who had spent a great deal of their life keeping things carefully closed and had recently stopped seeing the point. "Nova," he said. "That sounds serious." "It is." Slightly, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair away from my face, his fingers lingering at my temple. "I need to tell you something, and I'd like to do it properly, so please don't make a joke for approximately 30 seconds. It's a very tight window." "Nova, all right," I said. 30 seconds. Go." He looked at me steadily, with the full, unhurried attention that had unnerved me when I first arrived, and now felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I love you," he said. Simply, directly, with no preamble or performance. I didn't expect to. I didn't plan for it. But somewhere between the greenhouse and cleaning of the grays, and you stealing my armchair in the library every evening, it happened, and I find I have no interest whatsoever in pretending otherwise. A pause. Something fiercer moving behind his eyes. "You are my mate, Nova, my only one. That is not something I say lightly or intend to take back." Another 30 seconds came and went. I looked at him, this composed, impossible, occasionally terrifying man who ironed his socks and grew orchids and had apparently, without either of us noticing the exact moment it happened, become the person I wanted to tell everything to, and felt something in my chest crack cleanly open. In the best possible way, "I love you too," I said. "I have for a while." I was waiting for the right moment to say it, but then you said it first, which is honestly very annoying of you. Had a whole speech prepared. His eyes crinkled. How long was the speech? Shorter than your orchid metaphor, longer than your average board meeting. I'd like to hear it. You've rather preempted it. Tell me anyway, he said, and pulled me closer, and I laughed against his shoulder. And outside the morning continued arriving over the estate with no particular regard for how significant everything felt. "I love you," I said again, into the warm fabric of his shirt. That was the whole speech, really. Everything else was just padding. His arms tightened around me. His lips pressed to the top of my head, slow and deliberate. "That," he said quietly, "is sufficient. Happiness, I have learned, does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs in a world that contains, among other things, your twin brother." Leo arrived on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday, because I had finally, after weeks of telling myself I was simply settling in, sat down at the writing desk in the library and made a list. A practical one. Things I might build. Things I can do. A botanical supply business. Written at the bottom with a question mark. The result of weeks of quiet research conducted in the library while Atlas was on calls. It was not yet a plan. It was the outline of one, and it was fragile enough that I hadn't said it aloud to anyone yet. I wanted to be sure of it first. I wanted it to be mine before it became anything else. That morning, Atlas had brought me coffee, having learned eventually that I preferred it to tea, and then retreated to the other desk to finish his work. And then the butler appeared at the library door with the expression of someone delivering a weather warning. "Mr. Leo is here," he said, "for Master Atlas." I closed my book. Leo was in the main hall, and he looked terrible, which should have made me feel satisfied and did not quite, because he was still my brother, and whatever he'd done, he was clearly in distress. He was thinner than I remembered. His clothes were expensive but crumpled. His usual polished brightness had acquired several significant smudges. When he saw me, he flinched. "Nova," he said, and his voice had the particular quality of someone who has had several weeks to think about their choices and has found the experience very unpleasant. "Leo," I said, with a composure I was extremely pleased about, "this is unexpected. I need to speak to Atlas." "I imagine you do." He opened his mouth. And then Atlas arrived and the room shifted the way it always did when Atlas walked into one, as though the air had to rearrange itself slightly to accommodate him. He stopped when he saw Leo, his face, which had been quietly unguarded a moment ago, on his way to find me, closed off like a shutter coming down. "Atlas." Leo stepped forward, and his voice cracked on the name. "I know I don't deserve to be here. I know what I did was don't," Atlas said, not loudly. He didn't need to. Leo stopped. "Came here," Atlas said, "which suggests you want something. What is it?" Leo's throat moved. "Jason, the man I loved, he left 3 weeks ago." He said I was. Leo's whole body seemed to sigh. It doesn't matter what he said. He was right. I made terrible choices, Atlas, and I threw away everything we had. And now, his eyes went briefly to me. "And now I see what I gave up, and I can't." "What you gave up," Atlas said quietly, "was a future you didn't value enough to keep. And what you're calling everything we had, I've been rethinking that considerably. We had letters and photographs and a plan arranged by other people. We had an idea of each other." He paused. "I'm grateful to you, actually." Leo blinked. "If you had come to that wedding," Atlas continued, "I would have married someone who would have been miserable with me, and I might not have noticed for years." Instead, his eyes moved to me, and there was something in them that was entirely unambiguous. Instead, I found something real. I felt my face do something I couldn't control. Leo looked between us. Something complicated moved across his face. Shame, jealousy, a reluctant recognition. He turned to me. "Nova," he said, and his voice was very quiet. "I am sorry." I had been waiting for those words for a long time. I had imagined, in various iterations over the years, what I would say when they arrived, the precise, devastating speech I would deliver, the accounting I would make of everything he had cost me. All the small, invisible wounds of a childhood spent in his shadow. What I actually said was, "I know." He looked at me. "I know you are," I said. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. It did. All of it, the wedding, yes, but before that too. Our whole lives, Leo. You took up all the air in every room and never noticed I was there." I let out a breath. "But I'm not interested in holding on to that anymore. It's too heavy." I looked at him steadily. "So yes, I accept your apology. But don't come back here, hoping for Atlas, hoping to take back what you threw away. That ship has sailed. It's in a different ocean. It's practically a legend of the sea now." Leo let out a sound that was almost a laugh, but with tears in it. He looked at Atlas, who had said what needed to be said, and was now simply waiting, patient and immovable, like a very well-dressed wall. Then he looked at me again. "You look," he said slowly, "genuinely happy." "I am," I said, and the simplicity of it surprised even me. He nodded. He turned toward the door. Then he stopped and turned back and said, with what I thought was his first entirely unperformed expression in years, "I wish you both happiness. Take care of him, Atlas." "Thank you. I intend to." And then Leo left, and the door closed. And the hall was quiet. I became aware that Atlas was watching me with that same look, careful, warm, unwavering. The one I'd first noticed months ago, when I saw him walking down that aisle. Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, I'd started thinking of it as mine. "You were very impressive just now." "Thank you." I've been practicing that speech mentally for approximately 23 years. The ship metaphor at the end was perhaps slightly excessive. I felt it needed emphasis. He crossed the room, and when he stopped in front of me, he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with the same deliberate gentleness, and I leaned into it without thinking. "Are you all right?" "Yes. Actually, genuinely, yes." I looked up at him. "Are you?" He considered this seriously, in the way he considered everything. "Better than I expected to be," he said, "given the circumstances." The circumstances being that I was deceived on my wedding day by a family of collective irresponsibility, and somehow ended up married to the best of them. "High bar." "Not that high," he said, with a straight face, and I laughed, and he smiled. And in the large, quiet hall of the estate, with the autumn lights slanting through the windows, this was, I thought, quite possibly the exact opposite of a disaster. The greenhouse is at its best in late spring. I am in here most mornings, which is something Atlas has accepted with the grace of a man who has made peace with the fact that his husband requires regular access to plants in order to function. He occasionally appears in the doorway, coffee in hand, and watches me water things with the expression that is amusing and heartwarming in approximately equal measure. What he is actually watching, though he would never frame it this way, is a business in its early stages. The botanical supply venture that had lived in a notebook for months before I finally said it aloud, and which now occupied a small but growing corner of the estate's outbuildings. With its first wholesale orders already fulfilled and a second greenhouse under discussion. He had not said "I told you so" when it took off. He had simply slid the first invoice across the breakfast table, tapped it once, and gone back to his coffee. The violet orchid in the corner has bloomed 3 times. I have also acquired through various means, mostly ordering things online at 2 in the morning, ostensibly for the business, several new specimens that were not previously here. Atlas has not complained about any of them, though. When the 6th arrived, he did say, very mildly, "Should I be concerned?" "About the orchids?" "About whether we will eventually be the orchids. Whether at some point there will simply be no room for us in here." "There's plenty of room," I said. "Also, you can't grow an alpha in a greenhouse." I checked. He had laughed at that. I remain very fond of his laugh. We are still figuring it out in all the ways that people mean when they say that. The world Atlas moves in is not always easy. There are things I don't ask about, events that happen at inconvenient hours, quiet conversations in rooms I'm not in. But there are also breakfast tables and library evenings, and the steady, daily language of 2 people who have decided to build something together out of the unlikely. My parents had been banned from the estate for the past 6 months. It happened after my mother showed up uninvited and tried to lecture Atlas about the importance of family loyalty, which, even for her, was spectacularly ill-timed. Atlas had shown her to the door himself, with impeccable courtesy and absolute finality, and then came to find me in the greenhouse and said, "I've told your mother she's welcome back in approximately half a year. You should have told her a year. I was being generous. You were being lenient, but still, thank you. She is aggravating, but family." He had sat down beside me on the low greenhouse bench, and after a moment I had leaned against his shoulder, and he had let out a long, quiet breath, the kind you let out when something tense has eased, and his arm had come around me. "Nova, I'm glad you came down that aisle." I looked up at him, at the sharp line of his jaw, at the composed expression I now knew hid equal capacities for tenderness and devastation, and said, "Me too. It's a deeply strained thing to say, but I'm glad that I committed identity fraud." His mouth twitched despite himself. Then he kissed my temple. "I, Nova, elder twin by 4 minutes. S-class Omega, reluctant wedding stand-in." Accidental greenhouse business owner looked at him, and then around at the blooming, thriving, entirely unexpected life I appeared to have built, and thought, well, that turned out better than I thought possible.